as promised. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to engage with us in what we really hope is a meaningful and interesting and relevant conversation to today's workplace. So as Albert alluded to just briefly before this, our topic today is called The Modern Workplace, the intersection of COVID-19 and the Fourth Industrial Revolution. My name is Amanda, and I'll be moderating our panel discussion today. Just a few logistics to get us started. We want to make sure you can all see us and hear us okay. Just make sure that you have the Zoom turned to speaker view so you can see who's speaking at any given point. You've all been muted and your cameras are off, just so we can keep background noise and stuff to a minimum. But at the end, we will open it up to this discussion up to questions, at which point you can raise your hand virtually to ask a question. You can type your question into our chat feature or our question and answer feature. So we'll be monitoring all of those different places. As it's relevant and as we can sort of sneak questions into the discussion as we go, we'll do so, but there will certainly be questions at the end as well. And then finally, the session will be recorded. So this will be sent out to all of our registrants after the session, so you can refer back to it at your leisure if you want to share it with your colleagues, etc., however you see fit. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our speakers to introduce themselves. So all of our speakers, if you could kindly introduce yourselves, tell us your name, your role and responsibilities in your current position, how you're connected to Champlain College Online, and then any sort of relevant industry or academic experience you'd like to share that you're bringing to our discussion today. So Alyssa, how about we start off with you?
Sure, absolutely. Hi, my name is Elisa Avelar, and I am currently the VP of People at Moto Labs. Actually, I'm on day 11 there. I just recently joined the organization to actually build out their HR and also help them go remote. They were not a previously remote organization, and so we're building something hybrid. But I have been working remote since 2009 in higher education or HR, global organizations and growing organizations from about 100 to over 800 people in 75 plus countries. So remote is kind of how I live. How I'm connected to Champlain. Champlain is near and dear to my heart. I started back in 2000 going to school online while I was living in South America. And so I've been an online student, and now I'm an online instructor and have been since 2012. I can't imagine doing work or life or school any other way than online. But I know there's a lot more to that. So I'm really excited to talk about today.
Thank you. Miranda.
Hi, nice to meet everyone. I'm Miranda Blakelock. I am the Director of Benefits Compensation at HRIS for the Kraft Group, better known for some of our winning sports teams, the Patriots and the New England Revolution. But we also have a very strong market presence in the manufacturing, retail, and professional services space. I'm also a Champlain College Online professor in finance and HR. I too also was a Champlain student, so it's near and dear to my heart. And I'm very pleased to be here today.
Thanks. Albert, can I call on you next?
Sure, and good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name is Albert Orbinati. I'm an assistant professor here at the college and the program director of the Business Management and Management Information Systems programs. I'm also a major in the Vermont Air National Guard. This is my 18th year in the military. And in the Guard, I am a marketing advisor to the Air Component Commander of the Vermont Air National Guard. And prior to Champlain, I was the Associate Vice President of Online and Continuing Education at Medaille College in Buffalo, New York. And I'm very pleased that you're all here, and I'm pleased to be with you today. Thank you.
Thanks, Albert. And Susan.
Hi, I'm Susan Zucker. I'm the Director of Supply Chain at Agrimark Dairy Cooperative, which is also better known as Cabot Creamery brand. We sell cheese and other dairy products, but we also sell powdered internationally, basically as whey or non-fat dry milk powder. And I oversee a service team and planning team that distributes those products, as well as a small package team. And both those teams were very impacted by COVID. They're generally teams that did not work remotely, but both those teams went remote during COVID. So I've had a very large impact. The small package team also provided packaging for small packages for events, which was drastically impacted by COVID. So I've had a pretty significant impact on my team during COVID. I was also very involved with online academics, not only teaching online for many years, but also did get my education online as a parent. And so I'm very familiar with online education and have enjoyed my experience through online education. I'm a big promoter for online education.
Thanks, Susan. And thank you all. I feel like I already have learned way more about each of you than I knew before we started. So that bodes well for the next 50 minutes. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now and switch back over to our view and get us started on our questions. So to kick us off, let's talk about the fourth industrial revolution. Albert, can you give us just a brief definition, sort of set the stage for what we're talking about here today?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. So before I give you the definition of the fourth, I thought I'd give everybody a brief history lesson on industrial revolutions, because to understand the fourth, you kind of have to understand where we came from. So the first industrial revolution started around 1760, used water and steam power to mechanize production. About 100 years later is the second industrial revolution around 1870, and it used electric power to create mass production. About 100 years after that was the third industrial revolution, started in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and it used electronics and information technology to automate production. So think the rise of the computer there. Now, a fourth industrial revolution is building on the third, and that's where we are today. It's characterized by a fusion of technologies that are really blurring the lines between the physical, the digital, and the biological spheres. And there are a few reasons why today's transformations represent not merely a prolongation of the third industrial revolution, but rather an arrival of a fourth distinct one. And that has to do with the velocity of changes, the scope of those changes that are happening, and the impact to systems that are occurring. So in terms of velocity, the speed of the current breakthroughs, technological breakthroughs, really has no historical precedent. When you compare it with the first three industrial revolutions, the fourth is evolving at a rather exponential rate rather than a linear pace like the first three did. It's also disrupting almost every industry in the country. And the breadth and depth of these changes are bringing forth the transformation of entire systems of production, entire systems of management, of governance. So in terms of scope, the possibilities of billions of people connected by mobile devices with unprecedented processing power, storage capacity, access to knowledge are frankly unlimited. And these possibilities are being multiplied by technology breakthroughs such as AI, robotics, the Internet of Things, nanotech, quantum computing, and there are many others too. In terms of economics, the fourth industrial revolution also has the potential to raise global income levels and improve the quality of life for populations around the world. To date, though, those who have gained the most from it have been the consumers able to afford and access the digital world. And I think Susan will probably touch on this, but in the future, technological innovation will also lead to advances on the supply side with long-term gains in efficiency and productivity. Transportation and communication costs will drop, logistics and supply chains will become more effective, and the cost of trade will diminish, all of which will open up new markets and drive economic growth. However, at the same time, economists have pointed out that the fourth industrial revolution could yield greater inequality, particularly in its potential to disrupt labor markets. As automation substitutes for labor across the entire economy, the net displacement of workers by machines might exacerbate the gap between returns to capital and returns to labor. On the other hand, it's also possible that the displacement of workers by technology will, in aggregate, result in a net increase in safe and rewarding jobs. So today in 2021, we can't yet foresee which scenario is likely to emerge. And history suggests that the outcome is likely to be some combination of the two. However, I'm convinced of one thing, and that is in the future, talent more than capital will represent the critical factor of production. This will give rise to a job market increasingly segregated into low skill, low pay, and high skill, high pay segments, which in turn will lead to an increase in social tension. And finally, in addition to being a key economic concern, inequality represents the greatest societal concern associated with the fourth industrial revolution. The largest beneficiaries of innovation tend to be the providers of intellectual and physical capital. Those are the innovators, the shareholders, the investors, which explains the rising gap in wealth between those dependent on capital versus those dependent on labor. So technology is therefore one of the main reasons why incomes have stagnated or even decreased for a majority of the population in high income countries. The demand for highly skilled workers has increased, while the demand for workers with less education and lower skills has decreased. So all of this to say, the fourth industrial revolution brings with it both incredible opportunity, and if we're not careful, the propensity to create conditions that widen societal gaps.
Wow, that's a lot there.
A little bit of history, math, social science.
Welcome to college. That's all right.
Covered all my courses in that 10 minutes. It's perfect.
That was awesome.
Susan, did you have something, or are you just?
That was awesome.
Okay.
And I think the key word there is disruptive. I mean, I think that is the biggest challenge for us as managers going into this. I mean, I just feel so challenged. How am I going to lead my team through this disruption? It is an emotional topic for a lot of people. We are going to see the haves and the have-nots of people that have the flexibility and the technology and this splitting social gap, especially in manufacturing that you're talking about, this social tension of who can work from home and who can't work from home. What does that create? And what I can see happening is as companies are trying to decide how they're going to create a hybrid, or if they're not going to create a hybrid, people that want to work from home that have come to like that may leave companies that aren't going to create that flexibility and go to other companies where they can. And so you're going to have managers who are trying to manage through that. That's going to create a real challenge for people like me who are trying to manage employees and equity. What if one of our departments is really flexible and the other department is not? And I've got somebody who needs to man a phone, and that person we've decided needs to be on site. That this is just a morale issue and a challenge. So I know other people, you guys are in HR. How are you managing that from an equity issue when people come to you and say, hey, that's not fair? How do you manage it with policies? How are there going to be policies? I guess that's a big challenge that people like me are looking for is, are there going to be policies, and how do you manage that?
That's just the stark reality and kind of a scary thing to answer. That's a loaded question, Susan. Yeah. Honestly, I'm probably not your typical HR person. I do not like policies. I like guidelines and boundaries only because it allows flexibility to create solutions for the situation versus being black and white. So I've been fortunate enough to be able to build guidelines. I think what Albert's talking about in technology is we have an opportunity to create flexibility, but we've got to be creative and be willing to break the barriers of what we used to do, or this is how we do it. And so really just being able to, how can we make this more flexible? What can we do? I've worked in manufacturing, so I understand that someone has to man the machine, someone has to pack the product and things of that nature. But is there in other areas where can we provide flexibility? Maybe there's a shift in blending jobs. And where I'm currently at now, we work in building mobile apps that are bringing communities together so people can have resources and the tools at their hand and at their hand to be able to do things if they're in a hybrid environment, a remote environment, if they're students or if they're employees. And so it's just a matter of giving people the right tools to be able to communicate on a regular basis. But you've got to think outside of the box. Like, okay, do they have to answer the phone at the office? Why can't there be AWS cloud? I'm not trying to give anybody any kind of clout there, but where can we build, a virtual PBX and people can answer their phones? We all know that call centers are around the globe for US companies. Why can't we build those now here in the US and give work to the US workers, where we seem to have seen a gap in that skilled, non-skilled, essential, non-essential workforce?
And I would just add to that, Susan, the other challenge is really managers haven't had to deal with this before, right? So this is not only them learning how to manage remotely and manage these kind of discussions, but really how are they learning to do that while they're still also being disrupted? So it's really a challenge, I think, from a management level to try and manage these crises in the day-to-day.
Right, and support people. And, this social tension that Albert's sort of talking about, that may be further down the road, as we're going towards this, but you can almost see this as societal division that some of this technology does create as you get further down the road, and this worker split, so to say. And in a manufacturing environment, it's a little bit more visible. We used to have an admin office, and the joke was, what's going on at the country club? Between the distribution center, which was over across the street, they would joke, oh, how's the country club going over at the admin center? But it even creates a second tier of this more elite or more perceived, although those of us who have been working from home, sort of the joke was, we've never been busier in our lives. You're 24/7, you are working more, you are more productive in different ways, but at the same time, there is a value to that. You could pick up your kids if you need to. We aren't hiding that, as there is a value. But it is a different way of working. It changes everything. How do you get the value from, how do you work better? Because we're never going back, right? It's changed. Everything's changed. How do you make it better than it was before? And you build off things. I'm in the office today because we had a strategy session. We got a lot of value out of a strategy session on site, and it was good. It was a good meeting, and it was productive, and we felt good about it. So we do want to blend that and get the value of those on sites when we have them, not throwing everything out, right? But we want to improve things. So we want to make things better than they were before, but we know things can't go back to the way they were, right? I think everybody agrees, right? It's not going to be easy to navigate these waters.
No, it's not. And Miranda said a good point. It's been disruptive to everybody. So everybody just needs to take a step back and be flexible and think about what's going on instead of rushing to an answer because that seems the right thing to do. So I think communication is at the forefront of everything that we do. And it's thinking about, how is the person going to receive that? Am I saying things in an email or in a Slack message, or how is that being perceived because they can't see my nonverbal cues and those types of things? And I think all of us being adjunct professors online, we kind of get that inside of the classroom, but how do you teach that to your employees who have never been online? They've only worked in an office. And so I think the soft skills have become a highlighted skill versus, oh, that's a nice to have. Now it's almost communication and how people behave among themselves in an online forum, in chat or a conversation, or how do they collaborate and keep things straight when there's a string of emails flying through and you're like, who were they responding to? And those types of things, and being able to pull that together and then bring everybody back on board. Where, like Susan, you were in the office today and you were sitting at a table with everybody. It's easy to kind of corral everybody in, but when you're remote, the communication just really comes to the forefront, and you start to realize it's not the old saying of, it's not what you say, it's how you say. Now it's almost what you say and how you say it in a remote online environment is just as important, because what you could be saying could be construed differently because of how you've worded things, or you're dealing with people in other countries and culture and how things are perceived with somebody speaking a second language. So communication is definitely a heightened skill that we're all looking for, and helping people communicate better.
Alice, I think you nailed it, and it was just this was sort of the other direction. It was the next question I was going to pose to everybody was, this shift from those things like interpersonal relations and communication has been like soft skills, and in my experience, it's always been like, kind of subtly less important than whatever technical proficiency you bring to your position, right? But as all of this shifting is happening, like I think you're seeing more and more in job positions and in organizations that value on soft skills, which I think probably is more accurately emotional intelligence. So I'd be curious to hear from all of you. Do you think that change in terminology to like emotional intelligence really reflects this shift in the marketplace? And what experience you've seen with that so far?
Well, I can kick us off.
Yeah, sure, please.
One of the things that's becoming even more important these days is understanding the nuances in conversations and communication. And I think that skill, being able to read someone within the emails or the Slack conversations, as Alyssa mentioned, is really become really a key skill. When you're sitting in these Zoom calls for meetings, or you get an email with someone saying, thank you, for that. It's really trying to say, reading into it and making sure that they have a good understanding. And it's not just a, yes, I've got it. And really getting bias, like making sure everyone has bought into it. And I think that has become even more important as we've progressed through this pandemic time.
Yeah, and I agree. Soft skills are super, super important to be aware of people. I think on a different angle with that, I do think I've had a few people that on a personality level that have struggled with these kind of technologies a little bit more than I would have expected, that maybe had more relationships were more important to them. And maybe even some of these people were much better managers, but they needed that interpersonal skills that were a little bit closer than maybe some of the managers who were a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit more, maybe more direct, and a quick call, they were okay. But some of these managers had really personal relationships with people, and they found it really hard to not be with these people every day. So they're doing, I just met with one of them today, and he had met up with his team to do a bike ride down in the valley, and he's coming up with some creative ways to meet up with people and spend some time with them. Now that the COVID isn't really a factor in this, meeting with people to do some soft skill type things where he can maintain those relationships is important. But you do have different people and different personalities where people need to have that connection in a different way than just connecting with people online.
And can we acknowledge for a moment that there's nothing soft about soft skills? I don't like the term soft skills. I know that's the commonly used phrase, but essential skills may be more appropriate. You can call them whatever you like, but soft is a tough way to characterize them. And so when I think of things like cognitive flexibility, Elisa talked about flexibility and cognitive flexibility. And if you think about what's happening in the fourth industrial revolution, that is technology is in many ways taking the place of things that human beings used to do on a regular basis. And so our ability to be able to conceptualize complex ideas, that cognitive flexibility, nothing easy about it, my friends. It takes training, it takes practice, it takes you making mistakes. And that's one of the best things, if I can, about college. That's one of the best things about Champlain College and online education, because it gives you an opportunity to practice, to make mistakes, to do it over and over again until you get it right, and to learn, and of course, but exercise your brain develop that cognitive flexibility that you need for the future of work here.
Yeah.
And I would add on to that, the other skill I think that has really come rising through is whether it's a skill or a trait, is resilience. And seeing, I think they're going to be the most important skill and trait we have for our future leadership generation, is being able to continue to manage through these times that feel like they're never ending, right? We've been in post-pandemic world for 15, 16 months now. And it's hard, for a lot of managers to keep that same energy level up as they've continued to face new issues. And now as people are maybe transitioning back into the workplace, it's a whole nother response back to that. So I think that resilience, along with the cognitive flexibility, is really going to define our next generation of leadership.
Yeah, I think that's really important too, because I think this whole technology discussion and managing people through this next stage feels really overwhelming. Mm-hmm. It really does, because you come into it and you realize this is nowhere near over.
No.
This is really a whole new stage. I mean, Albert's outlining, 2020, and it's like, oh my gosh, we're like barely touching this beginning of a new world. And you realize we're never going back. Okay. This is just the beginning of a new thing. And it does feel really overwhelming. So resilience is going to be really key in supporting people, managers, especially as they go into this, to help them support their people who are like, hey, I just want to continue working from home. I don't want to go back. I don't want to change. I like this. And at the same time, employers are like, okay, but we have these big office buildings and we have all this other stuff, that infrastructure that's these are assets on our books. What are we going to do with these buildings? And they have to figure this out too. But at the same time, they want a win-win for themselves. So they have needs for what their business needs, and we need to find a common ground as we evolve to a more successful infrastructure between what business needs, what employees need. In the end, the employees, in a way, are going to drive what the change is going to be, because they're going to go where they want to be, right? In the end, they will drive that decision, because they will not stay where they don't want to be. And the companies will be forced to make the changes that they have to in order to get the labor. And that we're seeing that right now with the really, people are having trouble finding labor. And that's a big problem right now. And the companies are having to do all kinds of things to find labor. And the problem is not just with manual manufacturing labor, it's with skilled labor. So
I can,
yeah.
It's labor is Albert said in the very beginning, labor is going to be our biggest challenge. And the markets are upside down everywhere, right? There's more buyers than houses. There's more buyers than cars. There's more jobs than candidates seeking jobs. So everybody's fighting over the same. More companies are counter offering than ever before. Decline rates on offers, finding the good people, because people that have good jobs where they have the flexibility and there's already been a transition and they know where they're at, are not leaving their roles where they're going. But then we've also seen that in the last year, people have left their jobs more than they would have previously because of offerings. I'm a person that likes security. I never thought I'd be the person leaving a job during a pandemic. So, you just never know where that opportunity is. But I think one of the things, resilience and flexibility and compassion and empathy are at the top. We don't know what we're going to do. I'm supposed to be, deciding what our return to office policy or process is going to be. And I'm like, it's going to be a day by day, trial by error, because we need to figure out what's going to work. And I think the other thing too is look at your company culture. If nobody wants to come back to work, is that a sign that there was a problem in the workplace to begin with? That's something. I have a ton of employees that are like, we want to go back to the office. I was like, really? They're like, yeah, we love hanging out. And so now I have to create that environment. But then I also have people, because we've started hiring remote, and they're like, well, I'm never going to go to the office. I'm like, great. We'll build engagement. I've done virtual cooking, virtual building, escape game. There's all kinds of things you can do virtually. Again, back to the whole creative solution process. It's like, you just have to really think out of the box. And if people want to go to the office, go to the office. If you want to stay home, stay home. You kind of almost have to do that. And it's not because we're laying down for our employees. We're doing what's right as a human being. At the end of the day, we're all people. And I always say that if you lead with your heart, you can never go wrong. And I know people think that's funny because it's coming from HR, but we're all people at the end of the day, and we're going to make errors and we're going to make mistakes. And we have to just raise our hand and say like, oh, that's probably not the right way we want to do that. Okay, what's the next step? Where can we go next? Miranda's smiling over there. So it sounds like she's like, yep, we've done this a couple times.
We have there's a comment from the question and answer too that I think is super relevant to this particular discussion thread right now. It's, and it reminds you, Susan, you talked about it with your employee that's doing, bike rides with their team outside of working hours. So Patrick, who, thank you for this question, Patrick, asking about, this remote working and the integration of technology, and how does this sort of start blurring lines between vocational and personal life? We're able to adjust our schedule, but at the same time, you have to go from being a parent to an analyst and back. You have to go cook dinner and then manage the remote learning for the kids. So how do you sort of start seeing that, that creating culture, Alyssa, that you're talking about, and these options for people to still connect? And Susan, to your point, but also some people might like that very hard line of like, I'm here and from 9 to 5, you get me 100% as an analyst, but as soon as that's done, I have to go back to being a parent. So where do you see that balancing act happening now in this new modern workplace?
That's a great question. I think the work life is a blend. I've always said it blends. Because guess what? I'm driving in the middle of the day to a dentist appointment, but I may answer an email or Slack. I may get on a call real quick with somebody that needs something while I'm waiting to be seen at the pharmacy or something, or I have to go pick up a child or something of that nature. I think there's just a blend, but there does have to be some sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Guideline. I don't want to say company guideline, like, okay, if somebody doesn't answer me after 6 p.m., it's okay. It's not that I have to worry about, Slack messages or emails and asking why I didn't answer them. So there has to be some sort of trust, first of all, that your employees are working and they're being productive. If you're worried about your employees being productive, then you probably hired the wrong person. You have the wrong manager in place. So I think it just goes back again to like, setting expectations, clear communication, understanding what works for you. What is it that, will help you be productive at work? If someone says, I need to work 9 to 5 because I have to go do this, this, and this. Okay, great. I know that I have Miranda from 9 to 5, but I know Albert is kind of a flex, between a 7 and a 6 kind of thing. So the thing is it's a team, right? There's 11 players on the football field. Everybody has a skill. Everybody can blend, flex here and there. The quarterback's not always a quarterback. He usually will lug it to somebody and somebody else will throw it, right? And so the thing is, we have to be flexible. I think at the end of the day, it's flexible and just being human and just realizing like stuff happens, life happens. And I think we have pushed so hard in work. The pandemic actually asked us to slow down and really reset our lives. It's like, what was really, if you think about it, what was really the loser in all of this was our personal life when we were working and pushing and doing this, you got to do that and this and that. And now it's everybody had to slow down and everybody's like, wait a minute, I need to reset my priorities. My morals or my values got a little shifted here, chasing the job. And so now people are okay with maybe making less money with more flexibility, or now they don't have to sacrifice money for the flexibility because the pandemic said you can still be that analyst making X dollars, live in Nebraska and work for a big New York company. People are leaving California by the grove. So people are closing down their offices and saying like, we're going remote, many big companies, but at the end of the day, it's just about flexibility and being able to sit down and have a conversation, like what's going to work for you. And then being able to say, is that something that the company wants to do? Now, granted, I work for a much smaller company than maybe, Susan or Miranda, where you have hundreds and you're like, oh, how am I going to do this for hundreds of people? And it's a trial and error.
Yeah, Miranda, what have you seen?
I was just going to say, I love Alyssa's reference to football teams. It's our favorite, and soccer. But what I think, again, and I probably, will continue to say this because I think this, although it has provided a challenge for employees to figure out where their lines are in that. And I've heard a lot of coworkers and employees say that they've had challenges turning off at the end of the night because then they, the email's right there, the laptop is set up. So it's harder for them to find that balance between the two, even though they may be working out of their home. What I have also heard, and pretty consistently, is managers now they're now having to manage, as in the example, Alyssa working 9 to 5, but then Albert wanting to kind of work throughout the day. And so they're not being able to turn off either because they have employees running the gamut of those hours. And so I think that's really where, to Alyssa's point, the guidelines can help, is to start setting up what those expectations are and be a little bit more clear with communication. We've had a mix between manufacturing and our sports and entertainment groups of being on site for manufacturing. Someone still needs to pack the boxes and make the paper. But our sports and entertainment industry was just decimated by the pandemic. And so we've been challenged by that as well. And now as we're starting to come back into the stadium and welcoming fans back, we also need to think about welcoming employees back because it takes employees on site to actually manage that. So we're transitioning away from the remote work and really starting to focus more on in person again. And that brings its own set of challenges. People thinking about safety and security. They have a new heightened sense. I think if you've been home for a year, coming back is different than someone who may have been working the entire time in the office because you've experienced a different reality. So it's kind of helping them also feel comfortable to come back to the workplace for those who aren't going to be remote going forward.
I think Miranda has a nice point that none of us have really touched on, but how are you handling the back to, in person, in terms of, there's been a lot of questions about vaccination, not vaccination. And Amanda, if I'm going off a tangent, it's just interesting, like, what are people doing and how are people dealing with that I guess I also want it, people are very well aware of their health now, right? So now, and mental wellness is a big thing. And how are they going to the office without maybe anxiety about vaccination, not vaccination, who they talk to, what do they touch, not touch, those types of things.
Mm-hmm. So I can speak on my experience. I think what we've continued safety precautions all right along. And because we had manufacturing still going, we've had to really constantly be aware of that and be hyper vigilant of having, the Purell or the hand sanitizing stations throughout the buildings and posters and all sorts of different health areas. And when we think about that from people coming back who may have watched the news for a year and don't know what to expect, we're actually, there's a fear factor there, I think, for people. And some of them really can't wait to get out of the house. But it's a transition. Now you have a commute again. Now you definitely have to be in work clothes again. I don't know how many Zoom calls I've seen in t-shirts and, hats, which is never heard of before. So really thinking about how do we help them feel wanted back, I think has been important, doing welcome messages and videos, but also making sure that they know that we still take health and safety seriously. So making sure our posters are visible and the hand sanitizing stations are everywhere. And I think that's been helpful. And, when we had our first game here, we really went out of our way to have all of our part-time day of game employees come in and say, here's what we're doing to take care of you. And that's actually how, we want to phrase it. And I think that can go across all industries, because at the end of the day, the employer is also taking care of their employees and protecting that team. So it's important to make them feel wanted back and feel safe to come back.
Miranda, it's what you just said sort of also segued really nicely into a question we just got from somebody on the call named Benjamin. And I think we have a lot of private sector experience here on the call. So I'll be curious to hear if any of you have more sort of governmental public sector. And Albert, perhaps I can kick this over to you, but Benjamin's question, and I think it's a really great one for this, is, how might the government, especially federal government, be better about adopting progress and innovations that the private sector has really largely paved the way for? In his words, the government loves nothing more than going back to status quo. And we're really seeing this this he's really saying that he sees this fourth industrial revolution as being a crossroads for how the government leads and serves as well. So I mean, how do we see that shift happening? Because I think he's right. I think private sector has definitely led the way in this adaptation of flexibility, cognitive flexibility and actual flexibility.
Yeah, so the public sector, I can speak from my experience at the Air National Guard. You know, there's a hierarchy in the public sector, right? And so we tend to look upwards for leadership, for decision making, that sort of thing. And I think what we have not talked about yet in this conversation is viewing the pandemic as a defining leadership moment, because we've had maybe, perhaps, hopefully, a once in a generation opportunity to reshape leadership and to reshape the way that we look at organizations. And so in the public sector, putting the responsibility on the leadership of those organizations, and that's what we found at the Air Guard, at the Vermont Air Guard, that our commanders really stepped up to the plate and adopted an agile mindset. They were flexible. Maybe, I don't want to say for the first time, but these are, these are people who follow the rules and follow the book. But adapting an agile mindset, I think, is really, really important. And it's all about recalibrating the circumstances that you're faced with. And we find that in the military a lot, right? So we constantly have to recalibrate based on what is in front of us. And that's what the pandemic forced people in the public sector, the leaders in the public sector, to do. It also forced people to engage all stakeholders in the organization. So we, again, in the public sector, and I'm speaking from a military perspective, but we tend to listen to our airmen, in my case, but it's the commanders who make decisions. Well, now, the pandemic forced us to really listen to our employees, to our customers, to our suppliers in making decisions. And I think the last thing I'll say on this has to do with the intersection of employees and company well-being, employee well-being, company well-being. We've mentioned it a few times. And what the pandemic has done is the most vulnerable of us, who are employed, were affected the most from this pandemic. And so, again, I put the onus of the responsibility in public sector organizations on leadership, and it's up to leaders to step up to the plate and realize what this moment is. It's a moment for you to re-envision and reimagine how you do business and engaging more of your stakeholders and your employees. So I think that's what we did in the Guard, and I think it worked. I think it worked pretty well.
Alyssa, Miranda, or Susan, do you have any sort of public-private sector overlap here? Or it sounds like I saw a lot of nodding heads during Albert's answer.
Public sector is definitely not my niche at all, but I think it is pushing companies, regardless of what sector they're in, to their limits. And Albert nailed it again. I think he could have done this webinar on his own. He's with all the information, but it does come down to leadership. How are we doing? But none of us knew what to do in this type of situation. So it was a lot of trial and error. And I think leaders that were more, if they had more of an authoritative style, where it was just kind of like, this is what we do, probably didn't go over as well as people that were a little bit more flexible and willing to trial and error and be okay with making mistakes along the way. And I think that's where the emotional intelligence, or essential skills that Albert has renamed from soft skills, is really came into play, right? That empathy and compassion. And that's what's going to lead, is like really actually talking to people and really understanding what their perception is. And and mental health has come to a forefront, which has been a taboo topic for many years in the workplace, which I think is great that people are actually able to speak up about that and speak up about diversity and things that are near and dear to their heart. I think we've just humanized the workplace a little bit, which I think is really important. I don't know if that will happen in the public sector, just because there, like Albert said, there's such a hierarchy. People come to me all the time, Elisa, how are we going to do this? Or how are we going to do that? And I was like, I don't know. What do you think we should do? I'm okay with saying, I don't know, but let's figure it out together. And I think I'm not sure the public sector is they're open to that type of communication, although Albert seems to think that, or has experienced that with the National Guard in terms of where they kind of like, it just became a flat organization versus it becoming, oh, you're the boss, you have to make the decisions. And it's like, yes, I have a title, but I'm not necessarily going to be the leader in everything we do. And I think that's okay too.
Yeah, you hit it right on the head. That's right.
One of the benefits that we had in our industry was we were making food. And at the very beginning of this crisis, food was a really big hot spot, and everybody was really worried about the food supply chain. And so the big drive from our leadership was we need to provide food. There was a big push of the retail, the grocery stores were seeing empty shelves. Everybody was panic buying. And so that was really the leadership's mission, was we need to provide food to people. So that provided sort of a focus point for everybody in the organization, all stops, food out the door. And I think that gave us like a commonality, like a common mission for everybody in the company, was around whatever we have to do, it's to get food out the door. And that provided sort of this essential worker mindset. And it provided, everything was focused on, safety around whether we're testing at the doors, whether people are working off site. It wasn't so much about, who was working from home or not. It was about what do we have to do to solve that problem? Do you know what I mean? And so that kind of changed the dynamics of everything around that, solving that problem. And now, you don't have that problem per se, and it kind of changes the dynamics around not being that issue anymore. So it changes the dynamics of what problem are we trying to solve. We were very successful in solving that problem. We did amazing things. We had people on our teams that we said could never work from home that were working from home very successfully. And I think that's sort of the thing where now people are like, oh, well, you can't work from home anymore. And everybody's sort of like, but we did really well for 18 months. So, that's sort of, it sort of changes the game. And, but but at the same time, you don't want to lose what you had when you worked together. So how do you make that? But, we were very successful. Everybody pulled together as a team, and everybody still is. As far as like with the labor problem, there's still sort of this team, everybody working together to solve problems. There's still, everybody still has that nature of sort of the scrapping together to kind of solve problems. We still have that in our culture, which is really a good thing. But, everybody is tired still, right? Because you see a lot of problems. First it was COVID, then it was labor, then it was they just seem to be continuing.
What a great story about resilience that Miranda brought up. It is about resilience and perseverance, right? We've been pushing through, but like you said, we're exhausted, and it's not physically exhausted. I think we're mentally exhausted, which is where that mental wellness comes in. Everybody's like, I need a break. And so I think it's important that.
And I think it's important to realize it's not just the Cabot Agrimark people that feel like that. It's everybody feels like that, right? And that's the story that you kind of need to get out there, is that this isn't a, we are like, wow, but there's a lot of people that are feeling like that. I mean, I talked to somebody at a warehouse in New Jersey the other day, and he's like, I don't know how much longer we can continue at this pace. I mean, because at the ports, they're bringing stuff in from China to keep up with this Amazon demand. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is just not, this is a countrywide, elevation of things that are coming in as people are ordering more and more stuff online, and UPS and FedEx. I don't even know how those people are doing it, right? So it's a big shift in how things are being done, as Albert mentioned, with ordering online and everything changing, and at this accelerated pace that you also mentioned, Albert, with this rapid acceleration where you almost feel like you can't quite keep up.
Right.
Yeah. We might say it's job security, but at the end of the day, we're still like, I don't know how much more security I need.
I'm good with that. Yeah, I could use a little bit of a pause.
Right? Can we just hold that for a minute?
For a minute, just for a minute.
All right, so we have about 10 minutes left, and we have a couple questions that have come in through our chat. So I want to make sure we address a couple of these as we wrap up here. And I think we could go so many different directions in this conversation. So it's, I've said this in many other webinars like these before, that I feel like I have like 4 spin-off ideas already sort of in the queue already. But we have one question from Peter, different Peter from before. Oh no, excuse me, that was Benjamin before. So from Peter asking, does anybody have comments on the ability to balance team members or employees being remote when possible with the migration of systems and technologies like email security, HRIS, going remote? So things like software as a service, cloud-based, et cetera. And Peter, please, if I've butchered that or if I've truncated that in some way, please add it into the chat. But anybody want to field that?
I can
Maybe
start it
Miranda,
off. Yeah. So I think what we've found is if this pandemic would have happened 20 years ago, this wouldn't be a discussion we'd be having right now, right? It's our technology that's enabled us to have this discussion. We wouldn't have been on Zoom meetings. We wouldn't have had the different chat functions that were secure. We wouldn't have had that same ability to share encrypted files easily over, different document sharing tools. And so I think that's really allowed us to even entertain this idea of having remote work. I know it was in pockets before this, but this has really opened that door. And so I think technology is really what has saved us through this. And probably for parents too, because they had kids able to go to school online. Whereas before we only saw it in the higher education space where people could manage. And so I think what's really important is that as technology continues to evolve, it's giving us more flexibility. And so it's up to us to display kind of that cognitive flexibility to say, how can we optimize our tools, both from the employee perspective and the manager perspective, so that they can do it wherever they're choosing to do it. So for instance, we have our HRIS platform is a mobile app on people's phones, so they can clock in, they can approve time cards wherever they're at, they can do their performance reviews, all of that they can have at the touch of their fingertip. I always say it's just like ordering a pizza, you can approve a time card. And so making it really simple and easy for employees to do their job in whatever format they're doing. So whether I'm here at work or I'm home, I can still have access to the same information whenever I need it. So I think that's really been the thing that has allowed this entire opportunity for all of us.
And I think Miranda's right. It has to be easy because I know some of this technology is harder. I mean, we did a thing where you could do your expense report online, and it really isn't that hard, but we did have a lot of people struggling with that. But at the same time, we had to get away from these paper expense reports. It just had to go. But at the same time, I have somebody I have to walk through every time she submits an expense report, and she calls me, I know you don't want to hear from me. I'm like, I know, but she doesn't know how to do it. But the other thing I would mention is security is a really big deal. We did have a fraud issue during this COVID thing where somebody's login that they use for their personal accounts, they use the same one for their FedEx login, and it got hacked, and somebody was able to FedEx using our business account, some packages to international locations. So you do have to keep your employees apprised on how important it is that they change your user IDs and so we have security where people are doing their training on, changing your user IDs and make sure that they're difficult to change, don't use the same one for everything, right? Because this person had the same user ID and login for all of her personal accounts and all of her business accounts and everything. So when they hacked in her personal one, they were able to use it for everything that she had. So, just that kind of stuff, you have security, but, and they have skills and everything, but it's simple technology, but you still have to keep people advancing on it. You know what I mean? It's you have to keep people learning, and even if it's easy, you constantly have to keep people learning on how to use this stuff and what it means, and it's a constant learning curve, right?
Right.
Yes. everybody's tech savvy to order a pizza, as Miranda said, or maybe some football tickets online. But but when it comes to the work items, I've been remote for a long time, and we would hire and they're like, yeah, I'm tech savvy. And then you could see that they're stumbling through things, and you realize, one, our instructions need to be better. So it's always like a work in progress of making sure that how do you reach the masses, and, oh, this is how you use the expense tool, or this is how you log into the HR system, or this is how you log into Zoom. Let's face it, when the pandemic hit, Zoom was behind the curve. They were playing catch up with so many updates, even though I'd been using Zoom for years, with so many users and so many people. They were, they were getting hacked. There were celebrity bots that were showing up in meetings. And so then they had to do a bunch of security too. So as much as technology was put in a position so that we could actually function for the last 15 months, you realize how much technology wasn't there and how much it's exponentially grown in the last 15 months, just for the sake of the pandemic, of where you can literally do everything online. I can't remember the last time I printed something, even though I have a printer that, required paper and things of that nature. I literally need a laptop and my phone, and I can work from anywhere, but that's not the case for everybody. So we have to say, like, okay, how does Mary need to work? She's never had to be in this environment. She's been an office manager for 15 years at this office. She comes in, she logs in, she does her work, she goes home. So it's like when you're laying the groundwork for, I think someone mentioned in the question, like, how do you move to that technology? And it's just, how are you writing your documentation? Are you writing it is it a white paper, or is it actually, a process you could give to your 9-year-old and do it? That's what I always test. I always ask my kids, they're older now, but I would always ask my kids, like, does this make sense to you? Go in and try this, because, you're trying to reach all the masses, and how do people learn information? And like you said, Susan, the person that's never going to know how to do the expense report. But then I think about all the other great things people do, and I'm like, that's the one thing that they're struggling with. Like,
so good at everything.
She's the least of my worries.
She's so good at all these other things, and maybe I need a better SOP for her, right?
Exactly. That's what I always think of.
Yeah.
The documentation isn't right.
Yeah, that's right.
It's all about being flexible and compassionate and empathetic. If someone doesn't get it, I'm like, oh, well, how, what makes sense? Help them, have them help write it, those types of things.
And everything keeps changing. I mean, it's not like that anything stays the same, and then Teams is changing, and then this is changing. And so people have to be constantly in a learning curve. They have to be in a learning mode all the time. You never get to rest. You never get to rest on your laurels, because something's going to be changing tomorrow. So
every time I would write something for Slack, they would add a new feature, or they would say, oh, you can do it this way now. And I'm like, okay. So yeah, it's constant with resilience and perseverance, and not willing to give up, are kind of like the theme for the last 15 months. But like you said, we need to pause. I'd really like a pause.
I don't think we're getting a pause.
No. No.
Well, as much as I would love to we have a couple other questions that I don't want to shortchange. So Jean Marie and Rhonda, I'm going to connect you with Albert to continue this conversation after the webinar. But I will put a pause on this now, unfortunately, as much as I hate to do it, because we are coming to the top of the hour, and I want to make sure we're respectful of everybody's time. But with that last comment about sort of continually learning and continually being flexible, I will shamelessly plug, since that is part of the goal here, are a couple of our upcoming webinars that I think will do a better job of, or more of an in-depth job of going into, online learning with Champlain College, and how all of those programs do speak to this, as well as business and leadership as well. So let me reshare my screen here so you all can see. All right, so like I said, we've got this URL right here, online.champlain.edu/webinar. We have a very rolling schedule of all of our different webinars. You can see here, there's the first couple here next week that are just more general to Champlain College Online, talking about paying for your education, undergraduate sessions, as well as what online learning is like overall. But then, speaking to a lot of the topics we've talked about today, leadership and managing people, and all of these wonderful, wonderful topics, all get covered with our different program webinars. And these are those last three here. So you can learn here about our leadership master's program, our MBA info session, as well, and the undergraduate business management info session, all of which are in mid-July, and all really great opportunities to dig into these topics more. And also, if anybody is sort of in the process right now, our next application deadline is July 30th. So once you go see those webinars and then decide, yep, you want to go do your master's in leadership, for example, just make sure you're aware of these upcoming application deadlines. So I'm going to volunteer you, Albert. I hope I didn't warn you about this ahead of time. But I am going to volunteer you that if anybody on the call and on the webinar today has any further questions, please feel free to reach out either to Albert or myself. I'm happy to field questions and filter them to the right people. Like I said, I think you can tell by all of the enthusiastic responses on the webinar today, everybody's very passionate about this topic. So would love to connect with anybody further should they choose. So with that, I will wrap us up and just say thank you on behalf of all of our attendees today to our wonderful panelists, Alyssa, Susan, Miranda, and Albert. I thank you so much for your time and your insights. I feel like I got a lot out of this, so I certainly hope everybody else did as well. And we will be following up with all of our registrants for the recording.
Great.
Great.
Thanks
you
so much.
So fun. See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.